And okay, it is now 11:02, so we're going to kick things off here. Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Ashley, and I'll be moderating this fireside chat today between Rich Gilman, co-founder at Terrace Metrics, and Gauthier Philippart, CEO at Actionaly. Today, we're discussing the partnership and how this will boost behavioral health and social emotional learning in schools. So let's start off with just some short introductions. Rich, can you give us a 2-minute overview of Terrace Metrics and some of the challenges you're helping schools solve today?
Certainly, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm the co-founder and president of Terrace Metrics, which was created in 2018. We started with 4 school districts. We're located in Ohio, so in the Ohio area, and now we are nationwide. And not only nationwide, we are in the United Kingdom. And we are serving a very important thing that schools are continuing to struggle with, and that is, how is our students doing? Not academic-wise, but looking at the biggest predictor of academic functioning, and that is what we call behavioral health. Now that's SEL plus resiliency plus adversity, looking at all that collectively. And schools have, up to this point, have had a very hard time trying to measure, monitor, and manage the behavioral health of all students. We do that for schools from grades 3 through 12. It's a very simple approach. The process can be used for districts as large as 400,000 students to the most remote schools in America, and they are. One of the things that we are addressing is the idea of also involving the community and the families in here, but we are very honored to partner with Actionaly regarding that one very important piece, and that's that family monitoring. And I turn it over to you, Gauthier.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Rich. Thank you, Michael, as well, in terms of getting this set up. I'd first say the same thing that Rich says. I think the partnership is something that is really, really meaningful because we have 2 very distinct value propositions that really mesh and merge well in terms of providing services to schools. So Actionaly is a family engagement platform. And as most people would know on this call, family engagement is a key predictor of student success. And we see family engagement as a little bit different. We think that it's all about making sure you send the right information in the right format to the right audience, meaning the families. We do that in 3 different ways, what we call good to know messaging. So this is what you typically would see in schools: newsletters, announcement, emergency messaging, things that parents receive without necessarily having to do anything with it. Then there's need to do communication, which is sign, submit, volunteer, donate, anything that requires families to engage on their behalf or on behalf of the students. And then there's one-to-one engagement, which is voice and video and chat between the educators and the families. And what we started to do over the past few years, especially with COVID, is open all of these messaging capabilities to partners like Terrace Metrics that can then leverage our capabilities to better engage the families in terms of the content that Terrace Metrics and other partners wants to distribute to families. And so that's a big full spectrum loop of family engagement to school districts, from the district to the schools, to the students, to the teachers, really engaging the families.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, well, let's get a little bit deeper into this partnership. And you mentioned, COVID and especially why this is important today. Rich, I know Terrace Metrics has performed well over 1 million behavioral health assessments across the country. I can imagine you've seen some incredible data this year, especially with the pandemic. So how does this partnership help you and the schools deploy faster and reach the people who need help most?
Yes, it's a great question. So real quick background, how our system works is that we train specific members of every district and within each school. That's your school psychologists, your counselors, your social workers, and nurses if you have them. Only they have access to the identified data that students will do. They're going to complete an online assessment. It's only 15 minutes, very comprehensive. We're the only company that's looking at both the SEL side, but also the adversity side, and putting it together where those results are brought back to that team immediately. However, districts need to have, of course, parental consent. And one of the things that we have recognized long is that that's another responsibility on a school's very busy plate is to monitor the consent and who's returning it, among other things. Actionaly provides that. I'm not speaking on your behalf, Gauthier, but that's one of the reasons why we wanted to align ourselves with Actionaly, because they do all of that. They are also responsible and can upload rosters immediately. So that was another touch point we wanted to remove from the schools. It's just that onus of uploading rosters. And so this is an opportunity to do that. When the student takes it, the response team members are now able to respond to those students who are low in behavioral health, and also to identify students who are very well in behavioral health. And the idea is to move students along a behavioral health continuum. And by doing that, and our data shows this left and right, is that you improve academic and behavioral outcomes. But there's going to be a subset of students who are very low. And of course, schools want to reach out to those parents to make sure that there's a communication line. What do we do with this information? How can we help each other? Now, we have mechanisms within the Terrace Metrics system, but one of the other mechanisms that we want is much more of a direct contact with the parents, should that communication be necessary. And that's where Actionaly comes in as well. So it's on the front end to help do something that schools have been doing up to this point. And also another very important mechanism, should they want to use this, and that's that IM messaging to parents to reach out to them much quicker than our system allows.
Yeah, that's incredible, like increase in speed and engagement. But Gauthier, can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I know that there's some technology you're using that's making this a lot easier and faster, and I think that's kind of critical.
Yeah, and maybe I'll take it from the workflow perspective that Rich was describing also at the beginning, which is to say, the first part of the engagement that a school district that uses Terrace Metrics has to go through is this parent consent. And that for us is just a workflow in the schools, whether it's active consent or passive consent, where we make sure that we share that information or that request from the districts to the families across any different types of platform, whether it's an app, whether it's email, whether it's SMS. We get that sent really quickly to the families, where they can respond in just a few clicks. We have easy reminder capabilities, export functions for the schools. So we really take all of that responsibility outside of what the schools or Terrace Metrics have to do, because it's just one of the workflows that the schools would use in our districts to engage with the families. And then that seamlessly transfers into Terrace Metrics for all of the Terrace Metrics kind of behavioral health and resiliency factors and all of the assessments that they do. So that's what the second part of what I was referring to in terms of how we communicate, this need to do communication, that we are really engineered to drive responses on these need to do. This is something that families need to do. And then on the second aspect of what Rich was referring to, the direct communication, what is the best mechanism today to reach a person? Is it chat? Is it voice? Is it video? Is it email? Whichever way, we enable that communication based on the preferences that are defined by the schools and by the family, so that you then have the educator, the support team, or the counselors really being able to engage and then share the information with the families to get the communication loop going between all the different stakeholders. And again, based on their choice of communications.
And so, Gauthier, to elaborate a little bit more, this is a little more than a partnership, right? There's actually an integration here. So it's not like a school district needs to have two like disparate systems or whatever. Somehow you guys have now integrated in a way where it's seamlessly connected, and they can take advantage of this actionable messaging and family engagement pieces, right, as well as the behavioral health assessments and all that. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Right, completely. So that means that our systems and our database talk to the Terrace Metrics systems and database, so that from a user experience perspective, which is really core for adoption across not only the district, but also the families, you have access to all of the capabilities of Terrace Metrics from within, actually, therefore not requiring any signing to two different systems or identity across two different systems. All of that is exchanged behind the scenes without the district having to worry about any of the aspects of it. This is why Rich was talking about loading rosters. For example, that's something that we, of course, do for all of the schools across all the different systems, whether it's Clever, ClassLink, One Roster, or directly from the student information systems. We have that information. We only need to pass to Terrace Metrics the information that is relevant to Terrace Metrics to do the assessment, meaning that if a family, for example, does not give consent, then that's something that we don't need to disrupt the flow towards Terrace Metrics, they'll have all the families that consent has been provided actively or passively. And that integration is really deep in terms of systems so that it's seamless again to the school district.
Awesome, awesome.
I should also add just one is it's still a choice of the school to use both. I mean, if they just want to use Terrace Metrics without the Actionaly features, they can certainly do that as well. So it's not a mandate or a requirement. It's an added feature that's not there right now.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So the school,
just to that, same thing on our end, except that we've offered all of our school districts a new module that they can access and say, hey, there's a really good behavioral health module powered by Terrace Metrics immediately available. And the advantage of that was that we were able to sell that to a few of our school districts just by engaging them and say, oh, we have this new amazing capability from Terrace Metrics. They recognize the need, as Rich was saying at the very beginning. And for them, it's just, okay, let's turn it on.
Got it. Got it. And so the current customers from Actionaly now have access to turn on Terrace Metrics, and the current customers of Terrace Metrics who are using Terrace Metrics, they now have the opportunity to potentially add this kind of family engagement to the system. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that is
Correct. Yeah.
Awesome. I actually, sorry to hog Gauthier's time here, Rich. I'm not ignoring you, but I have another question because this is really interesting. This whole idea of family engagement and connecting and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about Actionaly and some of the metrics you have around engagement? Because I know that everyone wants to have more engagement. Everyone wants to get parents more involved, but how are you actually able to do it? Are you actually able to increase that engagement a significant amount to make a difference?
Yeah, and I think it goes with this basic principle of making sure that we reach families with the right content in the right format. So there's one thing, opening a newsletter is one thing, right? Does it mean it's read? Does it mean it's acted upon? Does it mean it's engaging? Does that mean that the parent went to paragraph 14 to realize that they had to click this link to sign up, right? So that's one way of communicating that is the standard. We support that because that's still a huge part of how schools communicate. But then when you look at the things where families do require to engage, then that's a separate format, separate message that says, by the way, parent, there's something you need to do. And then you have a list of your to-dos that is available for you as anytime as you need. Like field trips is a really good example that is classic. Like there's a signature, there may be a request for volunteers, there may be a request for funding or for some payments. All of that is sent directly to the family for the student so that as soon as one parent does it, it's done, it's taken. So in the same way that we enable those capabilities for these different workflows, that's how we'll use it for family consent. That's how we'll use it for making sure that they engage on anything that requires engagement from the families for any Terrace Metrics based workflows. And it's really about defining what is the format, how easily do I make it digestible to the family so that in 1 or 2 clicks, the responses that the school district requires is provided. But again, it's really this principle, make sure you use the right format for the right type of engagement that you need from families. And the response rate, I mean, the field trip, you get all field trips signed in 2 hours. There's nothing to it, right? It's not collecting the paper from the backpack and the usual kind of format that you might be used to.
That's great. We're getting a couple questions coming in, and if you guys don't mind, this one does feel a little bit suited toward Rich and the Terrace Metrics platform because it's about data. And this one is from New Mexico. The question is, how secure is the data that's collected?
That's a great question. We are, Terrace Metrics is FERPA compliant. We are HIPAA compliant. Because we're in the United Kingdom, we are GDPR compliant. So we follow every standard in terms of data security and protection. We don't see the identified data. There's a firewall between what the schools are doing and what we see. And so therefore, even when we are doing the training, among other things, that's very clear to the schools about what they're able to do and what we are able to have access to. So that makes, of course, data security and confidentiality is the biggest fear of any school, of any parent. And so we really want to emphasize that data security is the most important thing for us. That all actually goes down to who sees the data. And again, it's not the school, it's specific members of that school's team. So teachers don't even see the identified data. In the case of Actionaly, I won't speak for you, but there's data security measures on your end as well. And that's why we wanted to choose, why we chose Actionaly as a partner, because of how stringent their security measures are.
Gauthier, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, just to confirm what Rich was saying in terms of encryption, and we use all of the security features that AWS, Amazon Web Services, provides in terms of encryption and access. But one thing that's really interesting as well in this partnership is, as I kind of mentioned, like we would get the roster, and then the roster information is the identity. That identity doesn't even need to be at the individual level shared with Terrace Metrics, meaning that we won't see any of the data. It's in their database, it's in the Terrace Metrics data. We don't know how any of the individuals responded to the assessments. We do know who the parents are, we do know which school they belong to, etc. That information we can keep in one system. The other information, which is the content, the really critical security content or personal content that is hosted in Terrace Metrics, is not made available to our system. So it really makes HIPAA much easier, because systems only have partial bits of information, but the whole comes together for the educators that have been provided access, the ones that need it. So it's actually it makes it easier to be really secure, because we all have our own responsibility.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to pause for a second. I want to encourage any of the attendees who are, listening in. If you have questions, please enter them in the chat. Rich and Gauthier are here to answer any questions that may come up, or anything that maybe we're not touching on in this webinar. So go ahead and please enter them in, and add your state if you can, so we can get a sense of where you're at in the world. Let's go to another question here. This one is from California. We are a school district with strong community buy-in. How are the parents involved?
Well, I can speak from the Terrace Metrics side. They're directly involved, because they too will have access to the information of their child, which is the biggest thing that we think. And as a parent myself, and I have teens, I want to know how they're doing. I can understand academically, because I get those reports all the time, but I don't know how they're doing faring otherwise. And of course, if I ask them, they say, yes, I'm doing fine. And really, it's true. I mean, for most of us, that is true. But we are also going to suspect times when they might have stresses going on, and they don't freely divulge. Well, they might divulge to their best friend, but research shows that's as far as that research or that information gets. This is an opportunity not only to collect data for the students on the students' behalf, but for the parents to understand what are the strengths the students facing socio-emotional wise and resiliency wise, but perhaps what are some of the adversity situations that they're in. And so there's a parent report that's immediately generated. It is not sent immediately to the parent. That is up to the school to decide when to send that. And then there's that communication link between the school and the parent. And then I'll turn it over to you, Gauthier, to talk about how that works.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it is all about family engagement, right? So the stronger the community, the better, as always. And so we make sure that anyone that needs to communicate across the schools with the district approval is able to do so. So whether it's PTA, fundraising committees, sponsor groups, etc. But what's really interesting, and that's why we loved the Terrace Metrics kind of perspectives, like this is not just a student educator perspective, like the family has to be engaged. And so that's why we're really excited to be able to say, well, we have really meaningful engagement tools for the families. We know how important it is to Terrace Metrics. So let's make sure that within Terrace Metrics, you do have this ability to connect to the family in the most appropriate way, again, based on voice and video and chat, but only with the district's kind of, or the schools or the educators' understanding of how to best communicate or when to communicate. So that's where we take guidance from Terrace Metrics in terms of, okay, do you want us to make the parents report available? When do we do so? When does that come into the top of mind for the educator? And then they have these capabilities from within Actionaly.
So, I mean, I can tell just by the way you guys talk about your systems, that you're passionate about this. Rich, you're a parent. I'm sure that had a lot to do with this. Gauthier, I know your background a little bit.
Yep.
Exactly. So, but you know what? The school districts are passionate too. The administrators, the counselors, the people implementing these behavioral health and social emotional learning programs, they're passionate as well. But sometimes I think they feel like their hands are tied, or sometimes maybe they have really big challenges. And one of the ones I know that's coming up right now with just the pandemic and all this other stuff is like funding, and so is there anything you can share about what you're doing either together or separately that helps school districts get more funding or maybe qualify better for some of these programs that are coming up or something like that?
Mhm. Yeah, I can speak on our behalf. Just with the new federal funding that's coming up, many of our districts are purchasing our services through those funds, but there are other federal funds that were available. We're also, believe it or not, because of the services we provide, we are also what we call CPT codes. It can be reimbursed through the Medicaid services, among others. But we are such a low cost anyway, in comparison to any other competitor. We're the only company that's doing what we're doing anyway. And now that we've partnered with Actionaly, we are by far the most, how would I say, turnkey of any of these approaches. And we do all of that for significantly less than anyone else. So it's small to begin with. And then we work with districts in terms of cost. We don't turn away anyone.
Yeah, and I'll add to that a little bit also. So one of the reasons why we saw this need and why the school districts really appreciate the way that the platform is built is that we aggregate different solutions together, right? From this need to do, good to know, and then all of the different modules that are available. So from a cost perspective, you have economies of scope that already show up because it's the same system that allows you to kind of aggregate different systems. But then to Richard's point, and this is why I think SEL is so important to schools right now. It's so critical. There are plenty of funds from the CARES Act or the ESSER funds that are now available through the latest plan that we can help make sure that schools understand how that process works and then make sure that they can get the funds that they need from ESSER to make sure that they can fund this. But I agree with Rich, like there's already huge benefits in terms of cost benefit perspectives that I think it serves itself from that perspective, but then there's additional potential coming from the federal funding.
And I also think that the schools are starting to realize their return on investment for companies like ours, because we're one of the few that's actually collected that data. And not only does our data show that by being involved in something that Terrace Metrics is doing, you would not only improve academic outcomes by improving behavioral health, but you are reducing the economic burden on many schools. I'll give you an example, and that is unexcused absences. Now, from the community, from parents and others, they may not see that, but that is directly tied to a school's budget. The school's budget is, in many states, is often tied to, well, how many times are your students attending? And what our data shows is that for those who participated in Terrace Metrics over time, especially those who were originally identified in the at-risk range, by the time, over a 1 year time span, you've actually improved the number of days those students stay in school, and that directly benefits their bottom line, increases their budget. I can give you more data around that. So it's yes, there is a human element, but there's also a budget element that this process saves.
You brought up the idea of data or the concept of data and reporting and stuff. Can you guys talk just a tiny bit about how what kind of reports that you create that maybe are better or easier to understand or use or whatever for the school districts? What kind of data did they get access to that really helps them out?
Yeah. So from the Terrace Metrics side, in addition to the student report, which is immediately retrieved by the response team, you have the parent report. When all of the students are done with the assessment, again, it's only 15 minutes. So even our largest districts of 400,000, they're able to complete all of their data within 6 weeks to 8 weeks. They're going to get a de-identified aggregate report, and they can retrieve that themselves. They don't need Terrace Metrics, so they can see it on their end. And then the district, when every school is done, they receive a de-identified aggregate report of the behavioral health in every school. This allows every school to understand what are our strengths and what are some things that we can do. We can target specific areas, like, for example, hope. Hope is one of the resiliency indicators we have. And we also provide a curriculum, a tier 1, a tier 2 curriculum, and videos for educators, in addition to videos for parents. So there's something for everyone. And the goal, of course, is to promote behavioral health on every student. This allows schools to identify those students who are doing really well, those students who need help. But more importantly, it's that communication element between the schools and the community that's often lacking in systems like, what other competitors are doing, that we really wanted to beef up, because research shows that the more a parent or community is involved in the behavioral health of the school, the quicker it is to address those issues and improve them.
Awesome. Gauthier, what about you? You have reporting and data in your system. What kind of stuff is available to the schools and the parents and so forth?
So all of it, but I think that more importantly, or not just as importantly, I think that the data has been one of the core elements of how we build the product. Like, we need to know what parent responded, how quickly, under what model, what language they use, so that we know how to continue to best engage them and then tailor the communication to really get to that maximum engagement. So in this, every message we send is tracked, meaning that we know who's opened it, when they've opened it, so that when we send reminders, for example, we don't send a reminder to a family that has already responded, because that can be seen as noise. So we want to be very conscious of how we optimize engagement for optimizing that engagement, and that's how, and we use data for that. So every interaction is really understood from how do we measure that engagement, because if you go to any school district and ask them, how do you measure family engagement? It's like, well, we have reports, we have parent-teacher conference, we do events from time to time. And then it's okay, well, what else? And well, that's what we do. And then if they go back and they can see, oh, we had 17 parents attend, or we had this, that. For us, it's much more about trying to build what we call the family engagement index, so that you could understand what engagement means. And then once you measure it, then you can improve. But first you need to be able to measure. So data is so important.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something we saw in Terrace Metrics that we really like. There's a lot of affinities in terms of how we see optimizing the community engagement.
Yeah. We're getting towards the end of the webinar. I want to make sure that we have a chance to get a little more technical for some people who might actually want to understand your systems a little bit better. One thing you mentioned, actually, though, that kind of got my interest is you said in whatever language. Does Actionaly actually like how do you deal with that, different languages across families, across the country, and then maybe just give us a couple minutes of some actually a little bit more technical understanding of Actionaly and what you do, how you work.
So we everything that starts and actually comes from what we receive from the student information system. So we integrate fully with student information system, and one key element of that is language preference that we receive, and then we allow our families within the product to define what their optimal language is, and therefore anything that we send initiated, it's entered in English. That's the baseline. The product is for US public school system, so the interface to the teachers and the directors and the principals is in English, but then any content provided is translated based on the language that the parents would have defined. And that's one of the first things we ask when we receive families. We do a number of different processes, like an annual information update, for example, where we ask all the families in a district to validate their content. Do they still live in the same house? Is it the same household? Is there a split household? Is there any additional information in terms of contact details that we need to update? We get that information very quickly, including language. And therefore, we then translate that. And translation is enabled in two ways. One is it goes to the language of preference, but then they can always revert back to the original language. So they can go, if there's something that isn't clear, then they can go back to the source, if that makes it easier. And that's applied across the good to know, need to do, and one-to-one engagement piece. So you can even have your translation in the chats, in the language that parents want. So that's kind of this perspective on engagement. And then in terms of technically, it's really so, and I'll focus on the need to do type of communication, the workflow based, which is we allow school district to design as many workflows as they need. We have the default, field trips, parent-teacher conference, registration, volunteering, et cetera, which is really engineered to make sure that the different pieces that are required for each workflows are really easy for the families to respond to. And then the district decides what workflow do I want to use. I do not want, for example, parent-teacher conference at the district level. I mean, there's no point, that doesn't happen. It happens at the classroom level. Field trip, same thing, classroom level. But donations or payment requests or annual information update, that's at the district level. So we have this kind of matrix of who should send what, and then we make sure that the family is engaged to all of these components. And then in terms of one-to-one engagement, voice, video, and chat, we leverage some of the best-in-class tools to integrate that into the platform, so that you then have a Zoom-like experience from within Actionaly when you need to have a parent online for the parent-teacher conference and the other parent in the classroom with the teacher and the student, depending on their process.
Thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for. Rich, do you want to take a couple of minutes just to share a little bit more technically what Terrace Metrics does and how that benefits this whole movement, you know, behavioral health, risk, resiliency, social emotional learning, you know, and helping the schools to, you know, accomplish their goals and build the culture that they want to build?
Yeah, and thank you. I think if nothing more about this pandemic, it's reminded us that we cannot escape adversity. But we all have always had a hard time understanding how can we identify those students who are, you know, experiencing adversity so much that it's affecting their ability to learn. And they've been struggling. And it's not just today, it's not even 10 years ago. If you go back 40 years, these districts, unfortunately, they're doing the same thing that they're doing now, and that's waiting for students' difficulties to come to their attention. The problem with that is that it takes up to 10 years for that problem to come to our attention. Unfortunately, of every 1 in 5 students who is struggling to a point where it is affecting them, only 1 comes to the attention out of every 3 of those. So 2 to 3 suffer in silence. This is allowing districts to really reach out to every student so that they don't have to suffer in silence. To your point, also your previous question, all of our materials, our assessments, our parent reports, our student report, all of that is also translatable in multiple languages. We do not use Google Translate. We have our own translators. And the other thing is it's highly flexible by our schools. Schools get to choose the indicators that they want. We don't do that. So the schools get to choose what they want, and specifically to whatever the group that they're looking for. So this can be used for 10,000 students as a universal screener. This can be used as for just 1 student. It's that flexible. The key for this whole thing, and again, for our partnership, is to create this one-stop kind of a shop for schools to use that becomes so turnkey. They don't have to think about some of the touch points they've had to struggle with, which is time consuming. And we know how the value of time is so precious to our schools, especially during today. We wanted to make it to a point where they're not even thinking about doing the system. The system will do it for them. And so again, we are very honored to partner with Actionaly, not only for our current partners who now have a choice, but certainly for our future partners who come on to see the benefits of using both systems.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We've actually run a few minutes over. I appreciate all the attendees staying on and being part of the webinar. What we're going to do is we'll make a video recording of this and we'll post it on the website, and we'll send it out in some emails so that if you were here today and maybe you want to review some of the stuff that was going on or whatever, you'll have access to this recording. So I just want to thank you, Rich, and thank you, Gauthier, for being here and being part of this and sharing so transparently about your companies in this partnership. I wish you well. I think it's going to be a great partnership, and just thank you very much. That's the end of the webinar. We'll wrap it up there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thanks, Mash.
All right. Thank you very much.